Okay, continuing, we're at part 9, Genealogy of Morals, page 169, in my handy-dandy copy here. We are going to do, for section 9, we're going to read every single word of the whole section. I have one little note here. Is Nietzsche a racist? Oh, and on the next page, a small note. State-mandated religion creates atheists. So that's the overview of what we'll look at. But what is all this talk about nobler values? Let us face facts. The people have triumphed, or the slaves, the mob, the herd, whatever you wish to call them. And if the Jews brought it about, then no nation ever had a more universal mission on this earth. The lords are a thing of the past, and the ethics of the common man is completely triumphant. I don't deny that this triumph might be looked upon as a kind of blood poisoning, since it has resulted in a mingling of the races. But there can be no doubt that the intoxication has succeeded. Alright, now he just goes and skips over that. Then he says the redemption of the human race, from the lords that is well underway. Everything is rapidly becoming Judaized, or Christianized, or mobized. The word makes no difference. So let's go back and visit those two sentences. I don't deny that this triumph might be looked upon as a kind of blood poisoning, since it has resulted in a mingling of the races. But there can be no doubt the intoxication has succeeded. Okay, so when the mingling of the races occurs, blood poisoning occurs. Okay. Was he racist or not? Were his ideas conducive to Nazism or not? Was he anti-Semitic or not? You judge for yourselves, but there are so many people trying to whitewash him, and alright, have it your way. The progress of this poison throughout the body of mankind cannot be stayed. As for its tempo, it can now afford to slow down, become finer, barely audible. There's all the time in the world. Does the church any longer have a necessary mission, or even a raison d'etre? Or could it be done without? Queritur, it would almost seem that it retards rather than accelerates progress. The church retards progress rather than accelerating it. Now, in which case we might consider it useful, because he wants to slow progress down, because progress means the growth of mob rule. But the church manufactures atheists. And when you have state-mandated churches, those manufacture atheists much more abundantly and much more thoroughly. That's why Western Europe, with all these churches that are paid for by the state, where if church is so important to people, so let's make sure that we fund churches and make sure people have a right to their type of church, and there are enough churches for everybody. We wouldn't want someone to be without their place for religion. So the state has its fingers all in that in Western Europe. And voila, atheists. Okay, but one thing is certain. It has gradually become something crude and lumpish, repugnant to a sensitive intelligence, a truly modern taste. Should it not at least be asked to refine itself a bit? It alienates more people today than it seduces. Who among us would be a free thinker, were it not for the church? Now, as someone who was raised in Mormonism, that's true. It didn't make free thinkers out of everybody in the church, though, I have to say that. But it sure made me a free thinker, and one of the things that really converted me, aside from reading Ayn Rand, which is the real thing, but one of the things that made me really question religion, before I even found Ayn Rand, in fact, I thought religion was really very suspect, because I read the Bible. That's one of the best, easiest ways. Get someone to read just the New Testament. It's not even the whole Bible. Just say, read the words and meanderings and doings of Christ, and then get back to me. It's so full of nonsense and evil. It's full of evil. Okay. It is the church which offends us, not its poison. Apart from the church, we too like the poison. This was a freethinker's reaction to my argument. Alright. So, a free thinker says that we like the poison. He was an honest fellow, as he has abundantly proved, and a democrat to boot. He had been listening to me until that moment, and could not stand to hear my silence, for I have a great deal to be silent about in this matter. Just in case you thought he was going to end that off, that's the end of section 9. If you thought he was going to end that off with a bang, no, more of a conundrum or a riddle. All right, section 10. I have a side note here. Marxism. That's my side note. The slave revolt in morals begins by rancor, turning creative and giving birth to values. The rancor of beings who, deprived of the direct outlet of action, compensate by an imaginary vengeance. All truly noble morality grows out of the triumphant self-affirmation. Slave ethics, on the other hand, begins by saying no to an outside, to an other, to a non-self, and that no is its creative act. So slave morality is responsive to some sort of oppressor by its nature. Okay, this is a fundamental feature of rancor. Slave ethics requires for its inception a sphere different from and hostile to its own. All right, now if that's true, let me just pause. I did make a small note here. See how the left produces bigots. See, they have to be in a sphere to be the slave morality, to be the ones that are beaten down and oppressed. There has to be an oppressor. They have to be inside this sphere of violence all around them. And they create this sphere of violence by calling up places, ordering gay wedding cakes. The people make a gay wedding cake, then they take it home and they put in frosting, and they put faggot or something, and then they call the newspaper and say, look at this hate crime. They're manufacturing things. Okay, because they require a sphere of violence around them for their slave morality. Physiologically speaking, it requires an outside stimulus in order to act at all. All of its action is reaction. The opposite is true of aristocratic values. Such values grow and act spontaneously. Here, the negative concepts humble, base, bad are late, pallid counterparts of the positive, intense, passionate credo of we, the noble, good, beautiful, happy ones. All right, so very, very different if that's part of the genealogy of morals, that there is the good people, the upper class, who say that the good is to be like us, and then the lower class who say that the good is to react against oppression. Two different ways of looking at the good. Now, we skip quite a bit there. There is in all contempt too much casualness and nonchalance, too much blinking of facts and impatience. Here the most benevolent nuances of the Greek aristocracy, for example, puts into all its terms for the commoner. How emotions of compassion, consideration, indulgence sugarcoat these words until in the end almost all terms referring to the common man survive as expressions for unhappy, pitiable. For example, dilos, dilerios, penioros, mocheteros, the last two of which properly characterize the common man as a drudge and a beast of burden. How, on the other hand, the words bad, base, unhappy have continued to strike a similar note for the Greek ear, with the timbre of unhappy preponderating. The well-born really felt that they were also the happy. They did not have to construct their happiness factitiously by looking at their enemies, as all rancorous men are wont to do. And being fully active, energetic people, they were incapable of divorcing happiness from action. They accounted activity a necessary part of happiness, which explains the origin of the phrase "upratin." Okay, there you have a very important difference between how a noble person views happiness as action and as values, as acting towards some values. And an ignoble person, the low, the plebeian, the common, views happiness as a reaction, a rebellion. All this stands in utter contrast to what is called happiness among the impotent and oppressed, who are full of bottled-up aggressions. Their happiness is purely passive and takes the form of drugged tranquility, stretching and yawning, peace, Sabbath, emotional slackness. So there you go. Theirs is not a creative, but a checking out. That's what happiness is for them. It's a rebellion against the fact they're supposed to be productive or something like that. And for them, happiness is a rebellion against the values of the good class. Okay, we skipped quite a bit down. When a nobleman feels resentment, it's absorbed in his instantaneous reaction, therefore does not poison him. Moreover, in countless cases where we might expect it, it never arises. While with weak and impotent people, it occurs without fail. Now I can think here of how tough-skinned upper-class white males are, and how thin-skinned certain other non-upper-class white males are. It is a sign of strong, rich temperament that they cannot for long take seriously their enemies, their misfortunes, their misdeeds. For such characters have in them an excess of plastic curative power, and also a power of oblivion. Such a man simply shakes off vermin, which would get beneath another's skin. And only here, if anywhere on earth, is it possible to speak of loving one's enemy. So the Christians don't even get the loving one's enemy. It can only be for the nobleman. The Christians have to hate their enemies. But the nobleman can love his enemies because they're just below him and they're just not that great and they're just commoners and they just don't understand. So he doesn't have to despise people. Quote, continuing, the noble person will respect his enemy, and respect is already a bridge to love. Indeed, he requires his enemy for himself as his mark of distinction, nor could he tolerate any other enemy than the one in whom he finds nothing to despise and much to esteem. So he wouldn't be able to tolerate an enemy that he couldn't esteem. Imagine, on the other hand, the enemy as conceived by the rancorous man. For this is his true creative achievement. He has conceived of the evil enemy, the evil one. Once as a fundamental idea, and then as a pendant, he has conceived a good one, himself. So his reaction is a rebellion in which he defines himself as good and the other as bad. Let's see my side note. Benevolence cannot be achieved by Christianity. It cannot, and so the left is going to constantly have and manufacture enemies, even if they imagine themselves to be some sort of sick Christians of some kind. All right, next is section 11.